Good afternoon, and thanks a lot for this kind introduction and the very welcome words. I have, of course, now the difficult task to give the last presentation while we are already running a bit out of time. However, I will do my best to keep it short. I did take the liberty to prepare a couple of slides which actually partially recap what has been said already by my co-speakers. Just to start with a couple of introductory remarks, I should say that the regional question, which is the title of our today event, has been on the agenda in the EU for several decades by now, right? This was meaning asking what the role of the regions in the EU is and should be. In the EU. This was triggered by several developments, including, of course, the establishment of the Committee of the Regions in the 1994 and introduction of the principle of subsidiarity, decentralization processes in several member states, and, of course, not last, the development of the Union regional policy. So it is definitely safe to say that the role of the regions in the EU has grown for many reasons, which have been mentioned here too. Of course, the very fact that regional and or local authorities are simply closer to union citizens, and therefore they have huge potential to enhance legitimacy of the European Union. And of course, it's regional and local authorities which will implement and apply and enforce the bulk of union legislation, and therefore it's upon them that the effectiveness of union policy actually depends. However, any goals for granting regions greater powers at the union level often went hand in hand with concerns by some, put forward by some critics, including, for example, slowing down the decision-making processes or adding to the already complex institutional architecture of the European Union. Of course, the Lisbon Treaty made a couple of very substantive changes, and my co-speakers have said already that well, there's little left to be said about subsidiarity. I will nevertheless try to do my best. Yes, we do know that subsidiarity was introduced with the Maastricht Treaty. However, it's the Lisbon Treaty which has inserted a very explicit reference to the fact, or to its subnational dimension. So to the fact that certain problems may be better tackled, maybe not only at the national level, but also at the regional and or at the local level. So it is therefore not surprising that some mention of the subnational bodies had to be done also in provisions dealing with monitoring the compliance with the principle of subsidiarity, namely Protocol number 2 on subsidiarity, which has been mentioned many times, which indeed says that it is up for the national parliaments, right, when they consider issuing reasoned opinions, which might in the end trigger the so-called yellow card. It is up for the national parliaments to consult the regional counterparts, right, to consult where appropriate regional parliaments with legislative powers, which has been mentioned also by my co-speaker. The limits, of course, of this provision are, of course, very visible in that provision itself. As it says, yes, it is up to the national parliaments to do so where appropriate, to consult the regional parliaments, right? It's also about it concerns regional parliaments with legislative powers, and according to my knowledge, there are 75 of such parliaments spread over 8 member states. And we also see that regional parliaments within that setting, within the so-called early monitoring system, are not allocated votes directly. So their votes will not count towards triggering a yellow card. However, it's the opinions which will feed into the opinions of the national parliaments. No surprise, well, the early warning system has focused primarily on the national parliaments. So not surprisingly, it's the national parliaments which have been the focus of post-Lisbon attention, scholarly attention, paid to Parliament's role in the European Union. Some studies have, however, been conducted on regional parliaments' role within the early warning system, including a very comprehensive Committee of the Regions study commissioned in 2013, which actually reports rather mixed results regarding how regional parliaments have made use of the powers they have been granted. Yes, due to our time constraints, I will not go into all of them. However, generally, regional parliaments note that, well, in order to engage in genuine subsidiarity check, we just need time and resources, and it's just not enough to engage in a very superficial subsidiarity check. We need staff and time and resources to do so. The issue of tight deadlines was also mentioned. National parliaments are given 8 weeks to issue their reasoned opinions, so naturally this deadline, this time period becomes even shorter in the case of regional parliaments, as they need to prepare their opinions to enable national parliaments to issue theirs. So in the case of regional parliaments, those 8 weeks quickly become 4 to 6 weeks even. Yes, regional parliaments also said in that study, we kind of lack visibility. We do not have a direct link to European institutions, right? We actually communicate our opinions to the national parliaments, and it's up for them to forward them to the union institutions or not. And of course, the RECPEC system, which has been mentioned here too, does play already a crucial role. Interestingly, well, some parliaments also said, well, we simply lack the incentives to issue opinions, to provide input, because it's especially in those parliaments which are perceived as rather positive towards the European Union, they just lack the incentives to scrutinize the compliance with the principle, what they perceive to be as a rather Eurosceptic principle, let's say. So it's sometimes also the perceived lack of incentives of the regional parliaments. Again, I should mention here the numerous initiatives which have already been which have been started by the Committee of the Regions, including the RECPEX network and subsidiarity monitoring networks, and the numerous awareness-raising initiatives. But with regard to the early warning mechanism, the conclusions I rather draw from it is that, for me, or some parliaments perceive it as a means to potentially block union legislation, but it's actually in the first place about justifying union legislation. Early experiences with the early warning mechanism show that national parliaments rather see the lack of justification. So they do not see that many problems regarding the substantive non-compliance with subsidiarity, but it's more about lack of justification in the preparatory documents of accompanying union proposals regarding how the proposal complies with the principle of subsidiarity. And here, for example, better regulation has also been mentioned several times. it's this ex-ante perspective which we should adopt. It's about forcing, inviting, encouraging more careful justification regarding subsidiarity, and the better regulation, the numerous better regulation documents actually put undoubtedly a much greater emphasis on actually explaining and explaining better, which I can also link back to what has been said by my co-speakers too, that you mentioned that citizens sometimes fail to see the value added of EU legislation. So of course this explaining, justifying better might help them to see that value added. Given the time, I will not go into the action of annulment, which indeed the Committee of the Regions can also start against an EU act which has already been adopted. And here again, my perspective is ex-ante perspective. It's the very possibility, the very existence of the big stick in the Committee of the Regions' hands, which makes it maybe unnecessary to resort to it in practice, because it extracts already justification and compliance with the principle. Just to illustrate that, I also have put on my slides that, for example, better regulation on guidelines on impact assessment mention that, or in giving guidance to Commission departments preparing proposals, they say, well, be careful, compliance with subsidiarity is not to be taken for granted, and it's important that it will be scrutinized by many actors at different levels, at different stages of the decision-making process, so by different actors at different levels, meaning not only the national parliaments, but also the regional parliaments. To conclude, I just use here a phrase of renowned scholar that subsidiarity is simply an invitation to think hard about the appropriate level of governance, and indeed, in my view, that's exactly what it does. It encourages, invites EU institutions to think carefully and to justify carefully whether a problem needs to be tackled at the European level, or it should better be left to the national, regional, or even local level. Thanks a lot.